just made myself a cup of tea, and I wanted to sit in the garden in the sunshine and read you a little bit from my tatty edition of the Fellowship of the Ring. It's from the chapter The Bridge of Khazad-Dum. I think you know where I'm going. Aye, aye, wailed Legolas. A Balrog! A Balrog is come! Gimli stared with wide eyes. Durin's bane! He cried, and letting his axe fall, he covered his face. A Balrog, muttered Gandalf. Now I understand. He faltered, leaned heavily on his staff. What an evil fortune! I am already weary. The dark figure, streaming with fire, raced towards them. The orcs yelled and poured over the stone gangways. Then Boromir raised his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed like the shout of many throats around the cavernous roof. For a moment the orcs quailed, and the fiery shadow halted. Then the echoes died, as suddenly as the flame blown out by a dark wind, and the enemy advanced again. "Over the bridge!" cried Gandalf, recalling his strength. "Fly! This is a foe beyond any of you. I must hold the narrow way. Fly!" Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground, side by side, behind Gandalf at the far end of the bridge. The others halted just within the doorway of the hall's end and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. Tremendous courage in the face of just a demigod of evil, basically. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on the staff in his left hand, and in his other hand Glamdring gleamed cold and white. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadows about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. "You cannot pass," he said. The orcs stood still, and dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall, but Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He stood, small and altogether alone, grey and bent, like a wizened tree before the onset of a storm. From out of the shadow a red sword leaped, flaming. Glamdring glittered white in answer. There was a ringing clash and a stab of white flame, and the Balrog fell back, and its sword flew up into molten fragments. The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then stood still. "You cannot pass," he said. With a bound, the Balrog leaped full upon the bridge. His whip whirled and hissed. "You cannot stand alone," cried Aragorn suddenly, and ran back along the bridge. "Elendil!" he shouted. "I am with you, Gandalf!" "Gondor!" cried Boromir, and leaped after him. At that moment Gandalf lifted his staff, and crying aloud, he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand, and a blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. The bridge cracked, right at the Balrog's feet. It broke, and the stone upon which it had stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained, poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust out into emptiness. With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But even as it fell, it swung its whip, and the thongs lashed and curled about the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. "Fly, you fools!" he cried, and was gone. I love that passage. It's so ridiculously sad, especially when you don't know what's coming. When you don't know, obviously, about the return and Gandalf the White, and when you're reading it for the first time. I remember being a small boy reading it, and oh my God, I didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah, and it's something to be said about how magic, in quotation marks, works in the works of Tolkien, because he does a lot with language, a lot with words of command. Earlier on in the chapter, Gandalf uses one to try and lock whatever the entity is, it turns out to be a Balrog, out of Balin's burial chamber, and it breaks the lock. It uses its own command to break Gandalf's spell, causing Gandalf to reel. I might read that passage at some point as well. But Gandalf states, he's stating a fact: you cannot pass. And the Balrog tried to pass. Gandalf had effectively changed the laws of nature. He is a Maiar spirit, after all, imbued with the ability to literally sing things into existence, should he so choose. He's merely been muted while on Middle-earth, so as not to overawe the population, but instead gird them to resist Sauron themselves. But he made it a statement: you cannot pass. It's not happening. The Balrog tried. The bridge was smote asunder. Anyway, I absolutely adore the work of Tolkien. I hope you've enjoyed listening. I'll see if I can do this again. Peace.